This video might come as a bit of an odd surprise for people. So far, my channel has been focused on the craft of storytelling and has been hopefully educational in its content. But recently there's been a topic that has been swimming around the paddling pool of my consciousness that I really want to get off my chest. I love superhero stories, and for many years my favourite superheroes were Spider-Man, Batman, and Wolverine. But over the last year or so, a new challenger has taken the throne. Well, you read the title of this video, so you know I'm going to say it's Superman, and this is probably a strange take for a lot of people. There is a perception that Superman is boring, overpowered, and goofy, and unfortunately this perception is somewhat deserved because of several badly written stories that involve the character.
I'm looking at you, Zach.
I used to think the same things, but after having watched and consumed several good Superman stories, I became really intrigued with the character and decided to consume some more. Fast forward to today, where I've just finished watching Smallville and Superman the Animated Series, and I can now safely say that he's one of, if not my favourite superheroes at the moment. It's such a shame that there has been so much badly written mainstream content about him, so in this video I want to share what I've found out about the character and address some of the common issues that people have with him. I want to not only show why Superman is really interesting, but also why he's really relevant for today. And no, it's not because of this.
Clark Kent is Superman's critique on the whole human race.
It's because of the following reasons. I'm John from the Author's Anvil, and I really hope you enjoy this video. So we're actually going to start with a very, very short overview of the character. Superman, better known as Clark Kent, first appeared in DC Comics' Action Comics #1 all the way back in 1938. He was created by writer Jerry Siegel and artist Joe Shuster after many years of back and forth, rejection, and personal drama. I won't go into the full publication story here, but go look it up, it's really interesting. But anyway, in most media, Superman is an alien from the fictional planet of Krypton who is sent to Earth as a baby to avoid the apocalyptic downfall of his home. His ship crashes in the normal town of Smallville, Kansas, where he is taken in by farmers Jonathan and Martha Kent and raised as Clark Kent. Thanks to the yellow radiation given off by our sun, Clark soon develops superpowers, and when he grows up he decides to become a crime fighter under the guise of Superman. Clark's character, although starting off as actually pretty aggressive and harsh in his sense of justice, was soon changed to be the complete opposite. From 1940 onwards, in nearly all of his stories, Superman is depicted as the quintessential Boy Scout, a man of utmost honour and integrity, who fights for truth, justice, and the American way? Superman has an even firmer no-kill rule than Batman, absolutely detests violence of all kind, and does his utmost to prevent collateral damage. You deserved better, Henry. And as for his powers, well, they vary from story to story, but in nearly all renditions of the character, he is known for having super strength, super speed, flight, X-ray and heat vision, super hearing, invulnerability to most damage, and super breath, which includes being able to blow things very hard, not like that goddammit, and sometimes freeze things too. He's also been known to have other, less conventional powers, but for the purposes of this video, we'll just stick with the commonly accepted ones. The strength of Superman's powers are very different from writer to writer, but he has been known to be able to fly so fast as to break the sound barrier, to be able to move the orbits of planets, and burn through metal with his laser eyes. So, with this introduction out of the way, your biases against Superman are probably just being confirmed even more. Superman is just an overpowered demigod whose positive outlook on life means that he never has to deal with any moral complexity. How can any villain stand up to Superman? How is there any tension in Superman's stories when he's so powerful? Why should I even care about this naive, outdated, American-centric cis-white male? Well, I'm hoping that the rest of this video might give you some answers to these questions. So let's start off with the tip of the iceberg, the surface level complaints. Superman is too powerful and has no weaknesses. This is simply wrong. Since Superman gains his power from being a solar panel on steroids, in many stories he actually needs to make sure that he has a good dose of vitamin D or his powers start to deteriorate. Also on the sun vibe, if he's exposed to red light radiation, which is what his home planet of Krypton had, then he loses his powers. Yes, that's right. All you need to do to beat the Man of Steel is trap him in a room with a red light bulb in it. But if that's too hard, then why not just tear some of the wiring out of your house and start shoving it in Superman's face? Okay, you'll probably need something a bit more powerful than that, but seriously, Superman is actually weak against intense electrical shocks. To be fair, there's not much of an explanation as to why, but I'll take it. Superman's super perception can actually be a detriment as well as a power. His enemies often use supersonic sound frequencies to cause him agonizing pain, and overloading his other senses can confuse and drive him literally insane. Superman is also as susceptible to magic as any normal man, including psychic attacks and reality-bending abilities. Much of the DC universe is filled with magical elements or people who wield sorcery, and their skills can range from throwing magical fire, to mind manipulating, to teleporting Superman into another plane of existence. Superman has to overcome these challenges the same as any other hero. And Superman may be cosmically strong, but that doesn't mean there aren't others who are also cosmically strong. We'll talk about this more in the villain section of the video, but rest assured that there are plenty of people in the DC universe who can just brute force beat up Superman. Oh, and I guess there's kryptonite. It's a fictional mineral that not only makes Superman weak and susceptible to harm, but also degrades his body to the point where if he's exposed to it for too long, he dies. Kryptonite can be used against Superman in its solid form, melted into a liquid, and even dispersed as a gas. There are many types of kryptonite, which have different effects depending on the writer, and while criticised widely for being a bit of a cop-out weakness for a superhero, I actually really like it because there are some interesting stories that can be told around it. For example, I really like how the TV show Smallville depicts red kryptonite. When Clark is exposed to it, he temporarily loses his moral compass, which gives us the opportunity to see different sides of the character. So I think we can determine that Superman actually has quite a few weaknesses, and most of them are pretty easy for your average run-of-the-mill villain to use. Speaking of which, why don't we talk about Superman's rogue gallery? Let's start off with Parasite. He's a villain who can temporarily absorb the energy, powers, and knowledge of any living creature through physical contact. I wonder what would happen if he were to come across an insanely powerful demigod. Yeah, when Parasite absorbs people's powers, it's a stealing effect, so he's a really big problem for Clark, because not only does he have to fight against someone with all his powers, but he has to do it as a regular human being. As you can imagine, this leads to some really gripping stories where Superman is in a lot of danger. Next up, Livewire. Remember earlier when we talked about how Superman is weak against electric shocks? Well, there's a gal whose entire essence is made out of electricity. Not only can she shoot lightning bolts from her hands and manipulate electrical fields, but she has the ability to also travel through electrical currents. Also remember earlier when I said how much Clark hates collateral damage and endangering the public? Well, then how does he fight someone who can transport herself through public infrastructure? Even with all his incredible powers, this is always a really hard problem for him to solve, and thus makes Livewire a fantastic villain for him to overcome. Our next supervillain is Brainiac. He's an artificial intelligence, or sometimes cyborg, who uses nanite technology to manipulate computer systems and shapeshift. He's a really big problem for Superman on several levels. In many continuities, his origin is that of Krypton, or somewhere in the wider cosmos, which means he knows all about kryptonite and has all the future tech at his disposal to take down our Man of Steel. Again, because he's an artificial intelligence, he can also plug himself into various infrastructure and transport his consciousness across wireless frequencies. Superman may be able to travel at the speed of light and melt things with his eyes, but that's not really going to help him against someone who can travel through the internet. There's also the added tension that Brainiac is one of the few beings in the universe who knew the Kryptonians before their downfall, so often when Superman does manage to corner Brainiac, it's really hard for him to shut him down, because he's risking destroying one of the only links he has to his true heritage. That's really Gucci stuff, that. Let's talk about Bizarro. He's a mutated Superman clone who often isn't so much a villain as a tragic bystander. He has a lot of Superman's abilities, which are sometimes hilariously inverted, and his sense of justice, but has none of his intelligence or understanding of consequences. When he's not having an existential crisis about being a failed lab experiment, he can be seen trying to save people through unknowingly horrifying ways. Again, Clark really has a lot of moral conundrums here about how he deals with someone like Bizarro. He doesn't want to kill him, but he also can't let a rabid dog with all his powers run around Earth accidentally destroying stuff. I could go on and on about Superman's rogue gallery. I haven't talked about Darkseid, or Metallo, or General Zod, or Lobo, but I of course need to dedicate an entire section of this video to one of the greatest villains of all time, Lex Luthor. As with a lot of people's perceptions of Superman content, on the surface, Lex Luthor looks like your generic supervillain, a brainy businessman who's just out to do bad things because he's the bad guy. That actually was the case for the character in the first 20 or so years of his existence, but since the 80s, his character has really developed into something far more interesting. Lex Luthor is now often depicted as a pretty tragic person whose villainy is rooted in his obsession to be loved and respected. He's Superman's adversary not only because he sees an alien demigod as a potential threat to humanity, which is pretty understandable to be honest, but also because he's jealous of Superman's popularity. When written well, Lex Luthor is one of those fantastic villains who you kinda feel sorry for, and feel that maybe if he had had a better upbringing, he wouldn't have had to develop such a massive ego to hide his insecurities. But how is this businessman with no superpowers such a threat to Superman? Well, first of all, Lex is incredibly intelligent and ruthless. He's one of those manipulating behind the scenes kinda guys who only gets his own hands dirty when he absolutely needs to. This often makes it pretty hard for Superman to actually pin down whether Lex was behind a nefarious scheme or not. And even when he does realise it's Lex, he rarely has the evidence or means to actually bring Lex to a court of law. And even when he does manage to get Lex into a court of law, then the man has 1,000 lawyers and political figures in his pocket to literally get him unlimited get-out-of-jail-free cards every time. I want to show you a quick clip from Superman the Animated Series that I think really highlights another reason why Lex is such an interesting and dangerous villain.
I own Metropolis. My technology built it, my will keeps it going, and nearly 2/3 of its people work for me whether they know it or not. Even you have to admit it's a model of efficiency.
So, we've already established that it is nigh on impossible for Superman to get Lex locked up legally, but even if he does, Lex always has a massive trump card. Superman tries to put him in jail? Well, Lex can just shut down a few factories and put hundreds of workers out of their jobs. Superman tries to stop one of his schemes? Lex can retaliate by shutting down public infrastructure. Superman keeps meddling in Lex's affairs? Well, Lex can just stop giving his millions to charity. Do you want all of that on your conscience, Superman? Lex Luthor is an expert at pushing Superman to his moral limits, and that is why he is such a compelling villain. There is so much more to Lex Luthor and how he's depicted in various media, but if you want top tier Lex Luthor, I'd recommend either how he's depicted in Superman the Animated Series, or how Michael Rosenbaum portrays him in Smallville. As I said earlier, I could go on and on about all of Superman's villains, but I don't want to drag this video on for too long, and I hope I at least piqued your interest enough to go and discover the rest of his rogues gallery for yourself. So now we move on to the part of the video that I'm most excited to talk about. We've so far established that Superman has many weaknesses that are exploited by a diverse cast of interesting and threatening villains. Hopefully, I have already disproven some of the misconceptions around the character. But now I want to talk about the themes and potential stories that can and have been told about Superman, which makes him such an interesting hero. I want to start with Superman's moral compass, as I think this is the root to a lot of his stories. As I mentioned earlier, Superman is the quintessential Boy Scout, a champion of humanity who strives to always do good. He has an even stricter no-kill rule than Batman, and is traumatized at the idea of innocent people getting hurt. Which is why the main source of tension for most Superman stories, excluding you, Zach, is actually the public and not Superman himself. People often criticize Superman for never being in danger because he's so powerful. Although I've already disproved that perception, even if that were true and Superman himself was never in any danger, that doesn't mean we still can't feel tension for everyone else. Even outside our cast of main characters like Lois Lane or Jimmy Olsen, we as the audience should still feel tension when Superman gets into a scrap with one of his supervillains because of the danger it poses to the public and the planet. This brings me on to a neat analogy that I always like to use when talking to people about Superman, and that is that Superman is kinda like a shopkeeper protecting his antique china shop from a load of rampaging animals. Except the china isn't china, but people. Imagine the challenge of keeping all of that china, people, perfectly intact while you are trying to get that raging bull or group of hooligans out of your shop. Oh, and there's no police or law enforcement to help you out because they're also made of china. That, in my humble opinion, is a really gripping challenge to watch, and although every superhero to some degree has to deal with this challenge, I think Superman has it the hardest. This moves me on to my next point about how Superman is a fascinating hero, and it's actually related to how powerful he is. Small tangent, but have you ever accidentally high-fived someone a little too hard because you didn't know your own strength, or in my case been on the receiving end of this high five? Well, imagine that, but times 1,000,000 in Superman's case.
I feel like I live in a world made of cardboard, always taking constant care not to break something, to break someone. Never allowing myself to lose control, even for a moment, or someone could die.
Ah, the world of cardboard speech, a modern classic. Superman has to have insane amounts of control to make sure he never hurts anybody. Each time he touches someone, he has to make sure he doesn't accidentally break every bone in their body. Every time he uses his heat vision, he has to use it with precise intensity so that he doesn't cause more damage than he has to. Every time he uses super speed or flight, he has to make sure he doesn't accidentally crash into someone or something. He doesn't just have to control his powers, but also his emotions. Like he says in the World of Cardboard speech, if he doesn't have complete control over himself, then someone dies. If someone like Batman loses control, yes, there is the potential of him accidentally killing someone, but again, at the end of the day, he's still just human. If Superman, however, loses control, then whoever his anger is directed at is just plain dead immediately. Thus, it is Superman who is the hero always closest to breaking his morals, intentionally or not, because of his high power levels. That sounds like quite an interesting character, if you ask me. Last thematic point about his superpowers, but have you ever considered how terrible it must be to actually have super perception? Super hearing and super sight sounds great in principle, but imagine being in a dark, dirty, corrupt city like Gotham, where you'd be forced to hear the sounds of people getting murdered and other horrible things happening to them. In a lot of media, Superman's super perception is like a muscle he can flex, but still, someone with a moral compass like him would probably tune in occasionally and would then have to put up with the trauma of listening and seeing all these people suffer. The wider thematic point I'm making here is that having all these incredible powers sounds great and all, but it does come with some fair few curses that Superman has to bear every day. And this is a point that I'm going to be making again further along the video. Superman's conflicts are internal rather than external. Yes, he has a bunch of awesome villains that he has to beat up at times, but Superman's best stories are focused on the implications of being a demigod and the extent of his responsibilities. Let's talk about great power and great responsibility. Sorry, Spidey, you're not invited to this one. Okay, so Superman has all these crazy powers, but let's actually think about the implications here. Let's try and put ourselves into the tights of Superman. First of all, you gotta live with the fact that even with your godlike powers, you're not gonna be able to save everyone. You may be able to fly and super speed anywhere, but if two disasters are happening on opposite sides of the globe, you're gonna still have to choose one. And it gets worse, because where do you draw the line between your gig as a superhero and being able to live a normal life? Oh, sorry guys, I can't come out for drinks after work today because there's an earthquake in China I gotta sort out. Sorry Dad, can't come to your birthday party because if I don't, then several thousand people around the globe will probably be victims of a mugging or murder. I'd be really interested to know how you would split your time as Clark Kent and Superman. How much time would you be able to comfortably give yourself off without constantly thinking about the fate of humanity? Also, quick aside, but location-wise, how do you split your time? Would you just focus on your hometown or country? That's kinda racist, Superman. Or would you try and focus on the whole world? Ugh, Superman, a child in Kenya was kidnapped by a local militia while you were stopping that intergalactic menace. You missed a spot. Get ready then for the mountains of guilt you're going to face on a daily basis because despite all of these incredible powers, you should have been able to save more people. For someone of his morality and desire to protect humanity, every day is a failure for Superman. One of the most interesting parts of his character is this conflict and responsibility, and no other superhero has to go through this conflict like him. Let's move on then to something more abstract and more political. Okay, so imagine you're Superman and the US government comes up to you like, hey, don't suppose you could whip over to North Korea and topple that dictatorship for us? What would you do? Seriously. Yes, North Korea is a potential threat to global security, but if you were to make a move against them on behalf of the US government, then the international political consequences would be enormous. But let's even pretend that you could topple North Korea without any affiliation to a government. Should you still do it? What gives you the right to decide which governments are allowed and which aren't? And even if it was completely justified to do so, wouldn't there be a risk that everyone would now just start relying on you to sort out all their problems? Wouldn't there be a risk that you'd be stunting humanity's moral and potentially technological growth? Why bother doing anything for ourselves if we have the Superman to do everything for us? Superman is at the mercy then of international law just as much as anyone, and the moral implications of having him around are enormous. Just because you could doesn't mean you should. I hate to bring the dark cesspit of modern news to this video, but I'm actually very curious about how Superman would solve the Ukrainian-Russian conflict without triggering World War III. But equally, I also wonder how someone of Superman's powers and ethics could stand by and do nothing. Oh my god, Superman is such a freaking interesting character. So I think we've established now that Superman kinda has to deal with a lot. Even when he has the Justice League to help him out with stuff, it's still tough being a demigod in a complex world where you're not quite powerful enough to solve all the problems that you wish you could. Honing back in on the character of Clark/Superman, it's also worth noting how interesting his double life is. Clark pretends to be the bumbling nobody reporter not only as a disguise, but also as a way to humble himself to make sure that he stays grounded with the people he's trying to protect. This again makes him even more inspiring. It gives us this idea that anybody, no matter how meek they might seem, can be a hero underneath. Yes, I know we don't all have superpowers, but that shouldn't stop us from always trying to do the right thing to the best of the abilities we do have. But back to Clark. Very often this double life of his is rightfully depicted as quite a burden for him. We've already touched on how difficult it must be for him to switch off from being the hero all the time, but there is also that idea that due to his incredible abilities, there must also always be that slight temptation for him to unleash himself on the world and revel in the fame that it would bring him. This is just yet another interesting conflict for his character, that again many other superheroes do experience as well, but it really is the worst for Clark. The more he blends in as a normal bumble, the more humiliating and embarrassing it must be for him, which in turn makes it even more tempting to go to the complete opposite way. We get a glimmer of this in stories like Smallville, where when he loses his inhibitions with red kryptonite, we see that he goes full hedonist. Remember that red kryptonite doesn't make you evil, it just removes your moral inhibitions, makes it easier for your dark side to come out. Despite Superman's incredible altruism then, he is still human, and like the rest of us, he has a choice about how he uses his gifts, and sometimes he makes mistakes. Just read Injustice if you want to see how this is fully explored. The last question that I wanted to answer in this video is why we should care about Superman. What relevance does the Man of Tomorrow have today? Well, let's start with his origin story. Superman was raised and given his ethics by two ordinary working-class farmers. His story is about how any parent from any background can raise their child to be good if they're compassionate, patient, and loving. Quick aside, but I actually have a small peeve when people say that Batman is more relatable than Superman. Tell me, why is the billionaire playboy who lives in a mansion and spends time brooding with his butler more relatable than the farm boy raised in a normal town and has a regular job as a journalist? Just curious. Anyway, Superman may be a cis-white male, but he's also the ultimate immigrant, a literal alien from outer space, who shows us that despite being from somewhere else, you can not only be a part of a community, but you can also elevate it as well, even when those people in that community may reject you at first. As we've established, Superman actually goes through a lot of shit, but no matter how tough things get, no matter how dark the world seems, Superman, in most media, always remains a bastion for good. He makes mistakes, and he can't fix everything, but he always damn well tries his best to. Superman loves humanity, he loves helping others, and he loves the people around him. His biggest superpower is his ability to inspire others to be the same, to be better than him even. Superman is thus incredibly relevant for today. In a world of political polarization, international conflicts, and climate catastrophe, Superman is there to inspire us to try and bridge those gaps between us, to be kind and understanding towards others, and to encourage cooperation so that we as a race can improve. In today's Western culture, where the nature of masculinity is being examined and broken down, for better or worse, Superman is a hero who I firmly believe is a positive role model for men. He loves and respects his wife, Lois Lane, he's mild-mannered, and he always wants to help people. We need more figures like Superman for men to look up to and emulate. And lastly, at the end of the day, Superman is just comforting. Again, in a world where there are 1,000 shades of grey and terrible things happen all the time, it's just nice having a figure who does have a clear sense of right and wrong and can act on it. Yes, a lot of his stories can be cheesy and corny, but for me, that honestly just adds a lot of charm to the character, and it can be such a nice detox after you watch something grittier, both fictional or real. I love Superman, and I'm not expecting you to love him too, but I would at least like you to give the guy a break, and to appreciate that he is a far more complex, interesting, and relevant hero than many give him credit for. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. It really was a passion project for me. Usually I do much shorter educational content, and while I'm still really keen to do a lot of that, I've definitely caught the video essay bug, though having said that, this was completely made single-handedly by myself, and took far more time and effort than I ever thought possible, so I really hope it was worth it. I do just want to give a quick shout out though to a very dear friend of mine, Jobe, who looked at a very early version of the script and offered some fantastic additions before production. Thank you very much. Anyway, really hope again that you enjoyed the video, hope you want to stick around and subscribe, but regardless, I hope you have a wonderful day and keep writing.